Chapter 16. Stealing Mangoes. Amy woke up early to the sounds of boys yelling and a dog barking. Grabbing her fleece blanket, she ran to the window. Wrapped up in her blanket, she had a good view of the farmland from the second floor of the girls' mansion. Sure enough, out in the orchard, she could see Damien and Lima pulling the few ripe mangoes off the trees. Charlie, while scrawny and small in stature, had a very loud voice, and he was yelling for the boys to stop. Tearing around their ankles, Maxie was howling and barking. "Poor Charlie," Amy mourned. "He's been waiting so long for those mangoes to ripen. He wanted everyone to share them." Angry about the situation, she called loudly to the other girls. "They are taking the mangoes! Those selfish boys are stealing them!" Georgia was the first to rush in. "Who's taking the mangoes?" Amy pointed. The tall, well-built Damien was wrestling small, wiry Charlie, who was trying to protect his crop. Damien pushed Charlie down, but Charlie wasn't going to give up easily. Jumping back up, he tried to defend the two mangoes still hanging from a branch. Lima shoved Charlie hard. Thrown off balance, the smaller youth tripped over his dog and fell to the ground awkwardly. Charlie cried out in pain, and Maxie yelped. The girls were greatly distraught. Maxie was frantic. Jumping up, the little beagle began nipping at Lima's swim shorts. "Lima is hurting Charlie!" Amy cried out. Santa, Dia, and Lily joined them at the window. "We've got to go help them," Georgia said. "But they're hurting each other," Dia argued. "What if they try to hurt us?" "Please come help," Santa called out urgently, running down the stairs in a panic. "We can't leave Charlie to face them all alone." Santa and Charlie worked every day on the farm together. He was her best friend. "Go call Uncle Louie," Amy ordered Georgia. "I'll help Santa." While Lily and Dia hugged each other in the window, the other three girls ran as fast as they could to the gardens. Lima and Franz had taken off toward the lake. Damien was falling behind, trying to get away with 6 mangoes that he couldn't carry very well. Across the orchard on Mining Hill, Vanitha, Tina, Yuyan, and Rosa stood by their home, hugging each other anxiously. By the time the Forest girls reached the farmland, the Beach Boys had made it to Rainy River Bridge and were trying to find a place to hide and enjoy their stolen treats. Charlie was sprawled on the ground, crying. Maxie was licking his face, and one bruised mango lay close by. "Are you okay?" Santa called out, tears in her dark eyes. "No," Charlie moaned. "I can't move my arm." Charlie's arm didn't look right. "Oh, Charlie," Amy wailed. "Uncle Louie!" she called out loudly. "Uncle Louie, where are you?" "Why is your arm bending like that?" Santa fretted as the tears streamed down her dark face. She reached out towards him. "Don't touch it!" Charlie warned her sharply. "I fell on it, and I heard something snap. It hurts so badly." Maxie doubled her efforts to wash Charlie's face. "Santa, please hold Maxie," Charlie begged. Reaching down quickly, Santa scooped the squirming dog up in her arms and held her tight. The little beagle anxiously licked Santa. Uncle Louie was running from his cabin near the store. "What's going on?" he called out. Other children were running over from their houses. For a few moments, Paradise was in chaos. Some tinies were desperately trying to find out what had happened, while the girls frantically tried to explain. Reaching Charlie, Uncle Louie knelt down beside him. Amy tried her best to give him all the details from the very first moment she had looked out the window. "I think your arm is broken," Uncle Louie told Charlie with a grim expression. "I'm going to have to run back and get some supplies to fix it up. Just stay here and don't move." Addressing the girls, he said, "Talk to Charlie. Sing to Charlie. Keep his mind off the pain. I'll just get a few supplies from the store." There was now a large crowd around Charlie. Trying to help keep Charlie's mind off the pain, Georgia decided to tell their favorite story. One day, 2 tinies decided to go for a walk in the deep, dark forest around Cascading Mountain. With everyone enthralled by the well-embellished, heroic tale, the group calmed down. Having never fixed a broken arm before, Uncle Louie tried to refresh his memory as he ran toward the store. He hoped Nancy had left the plaster bandages on the left side of the far shelf and that his little book of important notes was still underneath. Thankfully, everything was in place. He quickly reviewed his first aid notes, grabbed the bandages, the Advil, and picked up a clean, sharp knife. To his great amazement, as he headed out the door, he saw 3 pairs of scissors lying on top of the big bag of pet food that had come in on the train that morning. Just in time, he thought, laying down the knife and picking up the scissors. School that day in Paradise was on first aid with a live demonstration on how to mend a break. Only 3 boys were absent from the class. Tina, Kenzie, and Yu-Yan helped cut the plaster into strips. The tinies were very curious about the large gel cap of Advil. Following Uncle Louie's instructions, Amy carefully poked a hole in the thick, transparent walls of the oval-shaped containers and measured out a small spoonful of the medicine for Charlie to swallow. Once the Advil had taken effect and Charlie was feeling less pain, Uncle Louie gently set his bones back into place. Charlie screamed loudly, and all the kids covered their ears, but when it was straight again, Charlie was a lot happier. Using a pail of water from the lake, Uncle Louie directed Tina and Georgia to moisten the plaster bandage, and they began wrapping it around Charlie's arm. "This is fun," Georgia said as she helped Tina smooth the bandages together and felt them harden. "Fun?" Charlie questioned wearily. "I'm glad you're having fun." "Oh, I'm sorry, Charlie," Georgia replied. "This isn't much fun for you, but this plaster is really cool stuff." "Maybe we can make other things out of this," Vanitha suggested. "I'm sure you can," Uncle Louie smiled. "However, the rest of these strips we'll keep for emergency use. But I'll ask the professor if he can send in some for crafts." "I'd like to make a bowl to put things in," Vanitha said. "Well, there's one thing you girls could certainly do with the scissors," Uncle Louie smiled, standing up and looking at them. "What is that?" Amy asked. "A lot of the boys need haircuts," he said, "and maybe some girls would like a trim as well. If you or any of the other girls are inclined to cut hair, that would be a skill you could use to trade for goods." "Really?" Amy said, looking at the scissors with surprise, her blue eyes sparkling. "I would love to cut hair." "Great. Then put up a sign and encourage the boys to take part." "I'd like to do it as well," Georgia offered. "Me too," said Vanitha. "Wonderful," Uncle Louie nodded. He looked toward the beach. "Now, I have to go find those mango thieves." "I hope you get them in big trouble," Santa demanded, placing her hands on her hips and swaying back and forth angrily. Uncle Louie turned around to look at her. "What kind of big trouble?" "They should have to pay for this," Santa stated firmly, stamping her foot on the ground. "Not only did they steal the precious mangoes, but they really hurt Charlie. He's not going to be able to look after the garden for quite a while." "They should have to plant the lettuce," Tina called out. "No way," Charlie argued. "I don't want them on the farm. They won't care about doing it right." "I know," Kenzie answered, his voice full of enthusiasm. "Vahid and I just discovered a pile of really great flat rocks in Mining Hill. We were going to start building a road from the store to the lake. You could make the Beach Boys help us." "Yeah, and tell them no more time in that lake until the road is done," Santa added, shaking her pointing finger. "I like that idea," Uncle Louie smiled. "And you'll supervise the job, Kenzie?" "Yes," Kenzie said, standing up straight and folding his arms together. "I'll help too," Amy offered, happy that consequences were being meted out to the offenders. It made her feel safer to know that Uncle Louie would deal firmly with bad behavior. "I can bring food and drinks for them if they do a good job," she suggested, looking over at Kenzie for approval. "But only if Kenzie says they deserve it." "That will be great motivation for them to work hard," Kenzie nodded, tossing his long, wavy brown hair out of his gray eyes. "Excellent," Uncle Louie smiled, thankful for the helpful ideas. "That will be the plan then, starting this afternoon." Rosa had been keeping very quiet all this time, except for a few empathetic wails when Charlie winced with pain. But now she was eager to impart some information. "Uncle Louie, I know where they are hiding," she piped up. "Oh, where?" Uncle Louie asked. Rosa pointed toward Rainy River, towards the closely nestled banana trees. Right in front lay a precious mango. As everyone turned to look, a hand poked out of the tall leaves and tried to reach the stray mango. It was just out of grasp. The hand retracted and then tried again, a little closer to the ground. "Thanks, Rosa," Uncle Louie chuckled. Before the hand could reach the mango, Uncle Louie had reached the bridge and picked up the mango himself. "Lima, Franz, and Damien, I want to speak to all of you right now," he demanded. Reluctantly, the boys slid out of their hiding place. Mango juice stains were all over their faces and down their chests. "What's up?" Damien asked, swallowing hard. "You know perfectly well what this is about," Uncle Louie told him. "You have stolen rare and very valuable food, which is unfair to Charlie, who has worked hard to tend the orchards. And you hurt him badly, which concerns me more than anything. Because of your actions this morning, Charlie won't be able to use his arm to do any work for quite a while. That fall broke his bone. How would any of you like to feel pain like he has?" The boys didn't have anything to say. They had never broken a bone. Scrapes had been the worst injury they had encountered. Having witnessed the pain and distress they had caused to all the other tinies, they were rather shaken. Damien looked down at the ground. Lima shrugged shamefully, and Franz kicked a stone. "Well, this is what I have decided," Uncle Louis said firmly. "From now on, you will not be allowed back to the lake, not even to sleep, until you have first of all apologized to Charlie for hurting him badly and stealing produce from his farm. What you did today is unacceptable behavior here in paradise. For this, you will reap consequences. All 3 of you will help Kenzie build a road from the store to here. When the road reaches the beach and is finished to Kenzie's standards, you can then go back to the lake." Franz objected. "We can't even sleep in our hammocks?" "You can sleep in the hammocks, but not on the beach. In fact, you can go and get those hammocks right now," Uncle Louis stated firmly. The lanky young lads weren't used to hearing Uncle Louis speak so harshly, and they certainly hadn't expected to face any consequences. Straggling off unhappily, they took down their beds. Following Uncle Louis with hammocks slung over their shoulders, they trudged to the farmhouse, where Charlie was sitting outside in the garden talking to Santa. Damien was first to apologize. "I'm really sorry, Charlie," he said. "I was only thinking about how much I wanted the mangoes. I'm sorry I hurt you. I didn't mean to get into a fight." "Thank you," Charlie said, unsure of how to respond, but appreciative of Damien's sincerity. Lima looked up uneasily and shuffled his feet. "I'm sorry, too," he pleaded. "I didn't mean to push you down so hard. I shouldn't have stolen your mangoes. I'm really sorry about your arm, really sorry. I didn't mean to hurt you." "Sorry for stealing the mangoes," Franz added without much emotion. Charlie nodded. "That's okay," he said. Uncle Louis asked Charlie how his arm was doing. Then, satisfied with his positive response, he took the offenders to Mining Hill. "You need to set those hammocks up in trees where I can see you clearly from my house," Uncle Louis told them. "I'll give you a bit of time to hang them, and then Kenzie will start you working on the road." While the young lads reluctantly repositioned their hammocks on the edge of the North Forest, Uncle Louis and Amy went into the store and arranged with Nancy and Milan that the road workers would be paid with freshly squeezed orange juice, lunch, and dinner until the job was done. Kenzie started planning the road project. Vahid and Zahir offered to stay with Charlie and Santa and fill in for the necessary farm duties. The orchard girls offered to help on the farm as well. When the Beach Boys had joined Kenzie, Amy walked over and gave a small drink to all the boys. "If you work hard," she told them soberly, "I'll bring you orange juice every couple of hours." "And you'll get lunch and dinner," Uncle Louis added, reaching into his pocket, "but only if Kenzie gives you a ticket." He handed the tickets to Kenzie. "Free lunch and dinner," Damien repeated, pulling his blonde, messy hair out of his eyes. Once his face could be seen, there was a pleasant look of surprise on it. "Yes," Uncle Louis smiled. He didn't try to explain again that this was the bartering method used in paradise. He just hoped that once the boys got used to working for their food instead of stealing it, they might realize the trade system worked well. "By the way," he said to Damien and Franz, "you both need a haircut. Talk to the girls. They have scissors." "How come you don't ever need a haircut?" Damien asked. "I've learned to do it myself," Uncle Louis smiled as he walked away. Chapter 17. The Stylists. The professor and Evan were greatly dismayed when they heard about the violence that had erupted in paradise. Louis had sent them a text. Seeing Charlie with a white cast on his arm was disconcerting for the professor. "Ça alors! A robbery and a broken arm," the professor lamented that afternoon as he and Evan looked in on the tinies. "How can this be?" "They will be teenagers in 2 weeks," Evan reminded him. "But where is this aggression and sneakiness coming from?" the professor bemoaned. "They don't play violent video games. They haven't witnessed violence in any shape or form. They have a loving uncle and everything they need. Why are they acting like this?" "Do you feel they would have to see it to do it?" Evan questioned. "I would have expected so," Jack Lemans replied. "I'm astonished. I'm glad that Louis has doled out some consequences. We must deter such behavior, or paradise won't be the safe, happy place that I intended it to be." "They are kids. Sometimes they will be selfish. It's just natural." "But selfishness leads to suffering." I don't understand why they are feeling selfish. Doesn't everyone feel selfish sometimes? Evan pondered uneasily. He hoped it wasn't just him. In our world, perhaps, the professor reasoned, we don't always have enough. We aren't assured that we will always have enough. And we see selfish behavior all around us, but the tinies have everything they need. There weren't enough mangoes. True, we will have to work on that. As they stood by the glass dome, watching the tinies finish their dinner and begin taking their dirty plates into the kitchen, Amy walked out of the store with the scissors in her hand. "Haircuts!" she called out cheerfully. The professor noticed the 3 chairs sitting on the grass near the store. Uncle Louis brought out a mirror, which he gave to Santa to hold. "Look at the sign," Evan chuckled. Vanitha was walking out of the store with a large sign that said, "Haircuts! Bring 1 flat rock for the road." Kenzie, Charlie, and Franz were the first to check in with rocks for the road. Kenzie had 2 good-sized rocks, one for himself and one for Charlie. Franz had a small one. The other boys, who weren't entirely sure they wanted their long locks cut off, stood at a safe distance to watch what would happen. Most of the girls stayed close by as well, eager to watch the show. "I'm with Amy," Kenzie called out, sitting down in the chair in front of her. Charlie sat in Vanitha's chair, and Franz sat down in front of Georgia. "So, how do you want it to look?" Amy asked. Santa walked in front of Kenzie with the mirror and held it up so they both could see. Kenzie looked at his brown curly locks, which framed his white freckled face. "I really have no idea," he smiled. "I just want this hair out of my eyes." "You mean the hair in front?" "Yes." Amy picked up the hair in front and did a quick snip, not wanting to cut it too short, but just enough to be out of his eyes. "Is that good?" she asked. One person laughed, and then they all began laughing. Even the professor and Evan had to restrain themselves. "He looks like a pretty girl," Damien mocked. And poor Kenzie did look quite pretty, with short bangs and long hair hanging down on each side. Outside Paradise, Evan whispered, "She's got to go shorter." Inside Paradise, Lima was of the same opinion. "If you're going to cut it, go short everywhere," he advised. With his tidy afro, he looked the most masculine of anyone. "Lima's right," Kenzie agreed. "Take it all off." Amy plunged into Kenzie's curls. Everyone cheered her on. Santa held up the mirror so Kenzie could see the progress. Kenzie watched nervously, but didn't say a word. Vanitha and Georgia waited, observing the process before beginning any cuts of their own. Finally, Amy stepped back as though she were done. There were a few calls for a little more on the left, and one suggestion to cut it shorter around the ears. After those minor adjustments, everyone clapped and Kenzie stood up and bowed. Amy smiled. The short cut looked good on Kenzie. In a low voice, Evan remarked, "So much better. I'm glad those scissors finally came." "It took a while," the professor agreed quietly. "It was hard to find anyone who would custom make scissors that small." Vanitha and Georgia started on the boys sitting in their chairs. "Any more customers?" Amy asked with a smile. I guess I'll get mine cut," Damien shrugged. "I'll be back with a stone." And with that, he ran off to fetch a rock. A number of other boys followed him to the hill, and so did Tina. Damien's blonde hair was thicker than Kenzie's and very matted from all the swimming he'd done in the lake. It was challenging for Amy to get a uniform look. "I look too fluffy," Damien protested when he glanced in Santa's mirror. Peering at his reflection, Amy had to agree. "Okay, I'll try to even it out," she told him. Working carefully and cutting more off, she got it very even. The only trouble was it was evenly slanted from left to right. Damien was not pleased. "Oh dear," she said, "I'll try some more." Watching carefully, the professor smiled. "This may not be her thing," he whispered. Evan chuckled. Before long, Damien had the shortest hair of anyone, but at least it was even. "I like it," Amy said happily. "You look dashing." Damien smiled proudly into the mirror that Santa was sharing around. He ran his fingers over his stubby hair and nodded his thanks. "I guess I'll wash off in the lake," he said, heading toward the beach. Uncle Louis stepped in front of him, shaking his head. "No lake till the road is done," he said. "But how can I get clean?" Damien demanded. I need a swim." "Use the shower down by the outhouse," Uncle Louis reminded him. "You can clean off there." Damien grudgingly headed to the shower. The professor shook his head. "I don't know how Louis will keep those boys out of the lake," he said quietly to Evan. "I agree with the road project, but he's asking too much to keep them out of the lake. I think I'd better say something." Evan shrugged. "Louis may have overreacted a little," he surmised softly, "but he's got a tough job in there dealing with teen attitudes. We need to support him in whatever he decides." Imagining what his own reaction to the incident might be, Evan surmised, I'm guessing we might have overreacted too had we witnessed the fight and heard Charlie screaming in pain. True, the professor admitted. He is trying to do his best, but I'm sure those boys didn't intend to break Charlie's arm. Speaking softly, Evan recalled, whether they did or didn't, you want to allow Louis to make his own decisions and learn from them, right? We are observing and helping this experiment along, but not directly governing. There was a long pause, and then Jacques Lemans said, You're right, Evan. Louis must feel free to make his own decisions. They watched as the boys admired the new looks. Vinitha had given Charlie a creative cut, with the top hair a little longer than the closely trimmed sides. Franz was happy that his straight, stringy brown hair was cut in a longer style, just above his eyes. Vahid and Zahir lined up for Georgia. Milan and Ponzi were asking for Vinitha. The two dogs, Freddo and Maxie, lay close by, watching from the sidelines, and nuzzling anyone who came within nuzzling distance, hoping for a few pats. Tina was next in line for Amy. Please just off to my shoulders, she requested. I don't want it too short. Amy carefully took her time doing Tina's thin hair. When she was done, the shoulder-length cut was a little crooked, but it still looked good on Tina. One by one, many of the tinies had either a trim or a cut. A pile of 16 rocks lay around the chairs. There was no doubt, however, when they were all done, that Vinitha and Georgia had a special knack for cutting hair. It's not really Amy's gift, the professor reflected softly. Evan agreed. You're my hair cutter from now on, they heard Zahir tell Georgia as he admired his new look one more time in Santa's mirror. Georgia smiled. Thank you, she said with a pleased giggle. The professor looked in with surprise, but he had to admit Georgia's stylish cuts looked great on Zahir, Vahid, and Charlie. Vinitha had shown great skill as well. Amy stood with her arms folded, looking in Zahir and Georgia's direction with a miffed expression. They all have their unique talents, Professor Lemans told himself. Chapter 18. Teenagers. With black notebooks in hand, the two scientists stood at the southeast side of Paradise. They are now teenagers, the professor remarked to Evan quietly. Classes were over for the day. In fact, the first semester was nearly over. Outside the biosphere, trees were bare. Snow was falling softly, and the sky was a gloomy gray. Evan and the professor had met to spend an hour observing the tinies. In his journal, which was nearly full, Evan entered 13 months at the top of a new page. He examined the orchards. Productivity has been exceptional for most of the fruit and vegetables, he remarked quietly, jotting similar words in his book. Yes, the professor replied. Everything pollinated by the bees has been successful. I'm not sure what to do about the mangoes. They aren't pollinated by bees? Evan asked. They can be, but a lesser long-nosed bat might do better. Only I hesitate to introduce bats. They aren't exactly cute, he smiled. They might frighten the girls. Do you think we'd need many? Chances are they won't be seen. It's not only that, the professor contemplated quietly, but what would they eat? We decided to avoid the annoying insects that are part of their food source. What about fireflies? They have a foul taste, apparently. Bees? No, I checked into it. Bees are active in the day and bats come out at night. Besides, we don't want bats eating all our bees. The mangoes are a valuable commodity. With a wry smile, the professor whispered, Ah, yes, and their scarcity led to an outbreak of selfishness. Googling what long-nosed bats eat, Evan scrolled through a few articles and smiled. Looks like we would need to miniaturize some cactus and send in the fruit, but we can do that easily enough. Why don't we release 2 bats when the mango trees are in flower and see how they do? The professor nodded and scribbled in his book, Miniaturize 2 lesser long-nosed bats and cactus. Building the road has gone well, Evan noted in his book. There hasn't been any stealing or acts of aggression since the Beach Boys were assigned to work. Louis says they have occasionally been sick to their stomachs, which is unusual for them, but on the good days they've worked hard. Standing close by, the professor read Evan's entry and then wrote his own. I'm impressed by the quality of the road work. Kenzie is a good manager. Yes, "He is," Evan whispered, comparing notes. "He and Damien have worked well together. I especially like the arch bridge. I know Louis helped them with ideas, but still, I'm impressed they chose to try something challenging." "Oui, c'est fabuleux, and well thought out. They've made good use of the flat rocks that we buried in the hill." "Yes, once they figured out how to mix cement." Suddenly the professor pointed to the road. "Must be dinner time," he whispered. "Here comes Amy with the carry cart." They both smiled, watching Amy as she followed the newly laid stone road, happily pushing the cart ahead of her and making up little songs along the way. From a distance, she waved merrily to the group of kids planting new seeds in the garden. Vanitha, Vahid, and Zahir waved back. "She's such a happy one," the professor said proudly. "Wait," Evan whispered, cocking his head toward the speaker. "Do you hear what she's singing?" "Oh, that she loves everything?" "She might be using a particular name." "Really? Listen." "I love the way you smile at me," Amy was singing very softly. They strained to hear the next line, but Amy was not singing to be heard. However, there was no doubt she had a dreamy look. "She might have a crush on Kenzie," Evan suggested quietly. "They've been working together for 2 weeks on this project." "You haven't noticed any special interactions till now?" "Not really. They seem like good friends and all, but I haven't noticed any special attraction," Evan relayed, noting down the incident. "However, I've certainly seen improvement in the Beach Boys. When they started this project, they were lazy and trying to cut corners and get everything done as fast as possible. Now they seem to have taken a real interest in making the road look good. Louis said it was also their suggestion to build the retaining wall around the drop-off into Rainy River." "Really?" The professor noted the fact in his journal. "I like that retaining wall," he added in a low voice. "The rock colors are well balanced, and it should withstand a raging river." He chuckled softly. "If we ever had to worry about raging rivers," Evan laughed, muffling the accidental noise he made with his arm. The road workers looked around suddenly as though they had heard the laugh. The professor and Evan glanced uneasily at one another. The dinner bell rang. "Time to eat," Vahid called out, standing up in the garden. "Wash your hands, everyone," Zahir piped up, dashing toward the outhouse with the others following behind. As they ran across the newly laid road right in front of Amy, Zahir looked at all the food in her carry cart. He stopped. "Is that for the road workers again?" he asked. With a smile, Amy nodded. "They are working really hard," she said proudly. "What about the farmers?" he asked. Amy's face colored. She didn't have a ready answer. "But you always go to the store," she explained. "So could they." "I guess," she faltered. "Hey, who's holding up the food?" Damien called out. Zahir shrugged and ran off to wash his hands. The professor and Evan exchanged glances. "It's not really fair," Jax remarked quietly. "If she's going to take food to some, she really should do it for all." Evan agreed and whispered, "Amy started bringing just orange juice and snacks. It's grown from there." "I suppose." Seeing that Amy had reached the road workers, the professor and Evan watched with smiles of approval as she reminded them to wash their hands. Grumbling just a little, the boys ran to the outhouse and quickly washed the dirt off their hands. I see why they've been sick a few times," the professor remarked quietly to Evan. "They've been working in the dirt, which must still contain trace amounts of bacteria, even though we attempted to purge it out," he sighed. "And they don't recognize the importance of soap." "Do they wash at all without a reminder?" Evan questioned, raising his eyebrows. He picked up his phone. "I'll send Louis a message to give another lesson on the importance of washing with soap." Amy handed out the dinner. The hungry boys were very appreciative of the fresh bread, soup, and salads that Amy had helped Nancy prepare. "Best bread ever," Damien complimented her. "I bet you made it this time." "Look, she's blushing," Evan pointed out softly. Amy indeed had turned pink, and she nodded, looking down at the ground quickly. "Oh la la, she can't be falling for a beach boy," the professor moaned. "Kenzie would be a far better choice," Evan agreed quietly, "but Damien is a good-looking guy." "Surely Amy isn't falling for looks. She's got so much to offer." "You sound like a dad." "You'll break her heart." "You do sound like a dad." "I feel like a dad." With compassion, Evan reached over and affectionately patted the professor's back. "A dad with 21 children," he teased, keeping his voice low. "And you're not emotionally attached?" Reluctantly, the professor had to admit that he was. "But my goal is still to remain as objective as possible," he whispered. Evan just nodded and jotted a few words in his journal. The professor admits he has lost objectivity. When Amy gave out the desserts, the dads, standing outside the dome, were still watching carefully. All the boys looked up at her with gratitude. Flustered, Amy dropped Damien's bowl of strawberries on the ground before she reached him. "Don't worry," Damien reassured her as Amy glanced up in dismay. "I'll clean it up." They both went to pick up the strawberries at the same time, hit heads, and ended up sitting on the ground looking at each other. The other boys laughed out loud. Standing up, Damien reached out to help Amy to her feet. "Look after the other guys," he told her kindly. "I'll clean up the mess." Lima offered to share his strawberries with Damien, and all the others agreed to do the same. "I can wash these off," Damien said, loading the strawberries back into the bowl. "Mind if I use some of your water?" he asked Amy. "Of course," she offered, bringing it over to him. He's rather charming," Evan observed. "He'd better be reformed," the professor remarked grudgingly. In his thoughts, he assured himself that early crushes often fade away. Once the dinner merriment was over, Amy made her way back to the store, pulling her little cart and singing softly. The professor sighed deeply. "You okay?" Evan asked. Yes, just not ready for them to start growing up. They've only lived just over a year." For a moment they watched in silence, pondering how quickly 13 months had flown by. Then the professor whispered, "Well, this road project has been quite successful in developing a good work ethic and building relationships. Now that all the houses are done and food production is going well, I think we need to introduce another project to keep everyone busy." "I thought you wanted to let them discover materials and develop their own creativity." "Well, that was my original plan, but time is short. They don't have 100 years to figure things out on their own. Plus, in such an ideal world, without any major adversity, wars, suffering, sickness, bad weather, you name it, there is no necessity driving human creativity." Evan looked up in surprise. He thought it was interesting the professor had admitted that adversity sometimes led to good inventions. He jotted it down. "Necessity is often the mother of invention," he agreed quietly. "So what do you have in mind, sir?" "I'm going to suggest that Louis has a build-a-boat contest," the professor announced, keeping his voice low. "There will be categories for the fastest, the most attractive, and the strongest." "What kind of materials will you give them?" "I looked it up online the other day, and there were suggestions for tinfoil, wax from specialty cheese, corks, wooden sticks, balloons, and even birch bark." "Wow, but of course," Evan whispered, running one hand through his spiky blonde hair. "Those would be great materials. And there's always building boards and the glue gun down by the store. Sounds fun." For one delightful moment, Evan imagined being in Louis's place and leading the challenge. If only he could go back and forth between the two worlds. This is exactly the kind of competition he'd loved as a kid. "Will you offer prizes?" he asked. "I'd rather not," the professor mused, stroking his graying goatee. "I'd just like everyone to enjoy the challenge for the sake of a challenge. It will be enjoyment enough if they manage to make a boat that floats." Evan nodded in agreement, writing down the contest details. Suddenly the professor leaned in to observe something more carefully. "Hey," he pointed out quietly, "what are Odin and Ponzi doing with that large jar?" Looking in the direction of the professor's pointing finger, Evan observed the two lads pushing a wide carry cart holding the clear jar of vinegar that Louis had ordered for his science experiments. They were heading into the North Forest. "Interesting," he smiled. "Why don't we walk over there and see what's going on?" Quickly making their way around the dome to the north side where they rarely looked in, the two scientists came to a forested area where Odin and Ponzi had built a small rickety shack. In front of the shack were 2 dark blue flags with gold writing. Dangling on a string from the roof of the shack was a large black object with 8 skinny legs. "Is that a spider hanging there?" the professor marveled quietly, straining to see. "They are proud of their victory," Evan remarked. "Guess I would be too." Nodding, the professor acknowledged, "Yes, I hate to think what would have happened if that black widow had bitten those girls. Odin and Ponzi did save their lives." "Did you ever determine how it got in the train?" The professor shrugged. "The box of wheels that I sent in that day had been stored in my garden shed. I assumed the spider was hiding in that box, and sadly I didn't check it carefully." He shook his head regretfully. I won't make that mistake again. Walking a little further toward the train tunnel, the professor leaned in closer to watch where Odin and Ponzi were taking the jar of vinegar. The two spider heroes dragged the jar deep inside the forest and then clapped hands in the air. Evan noticed they had also captured the box of baking soda. It was sitting on a carry cart. Sure hope they traded well for those commodities, Evan remarked. I'm sure Nancy wouldn't let them away with anything less, the professor nodded, rather pleased to see that Odin and Ponzi were intrigued by chemical reactions. The boys were far enough away from the store microphone that their voices came through only faintly. Now to try doubling the soda, Odin cheered. Ponzi picked up a mug and dipped it into the box. He began ladling it into an empty jar beside him. Scientists in the making, Evan smiled. They may find a new passion. Other than brooding about all the things they don't like? Exactly. For a few minutes, the two watched Odin and Ponzi as they poured a cup of vinegar quickly on top of the soda and then used a lid to contain the mixture for as long as possible in the jar. When it burst out and spread all over them, the boys were delighted for about 1 second, and then the vinegar began to sting. The scientists outside the dome tried hard to muffle their laughter as the amateurs raced at top speed to the lake and dove into the water. Walking back around to the front, in full view of the lake with the lovely orchard surrounding it, Evan and the professor commented on the heavily loaded banana plants. Plant reproduction has been quite normal, the professor stated, aside from the mango trees. In fact, it has been even more abundant than in our world. However, it's disappointing that we aren't getting any animal reproduction. Birds lay eggs, but they never hatch. I would have thought there might be baby ducks or rabbits or puppies by now, or even a fawn or two. I think we should get the incubators going again and develop more baby animals. Just animal babies? No more humans? The kids aren't ready to become parents yet. Evan agreed with great relief. Pondering the matter, the professor added, I do believe we should wait to gauge the public reaction to this project. Perhaps if all goes well, some may be eager to donate reproductive cells specifically for paradise. There may be those who would prefer to see their children grow up in such a wonderful, safe environment. Evan considered the idea. If we can develop a way for parents to interact with their children, he said thoughtfully, then paradise might be a popular option. It might even become in high demand. So much more could be developed if we gain public support, the professor agreed. For now, just animals and birds are required, and definitely more fish. I might try a few more plants, maybe some different varieties of roses and shrubs. The orchard girls need plants for their new gardens. And ferns for the waterfall, Evan reminded him, fully aware of the enormous task that now lay ahead of him. With a smile, he thought, the semester is nearly over, and Christmas holidays will be here soon. I was wondering what I'd do with all my time. Chapter 19. A Strange Event. The boys were coming. Quickly, Amy whispered to Zahir. Are you ready, Georgia? Santa? Hearing Damien's laughter, Georgia stepped forward with the others along the new road and raised her shaker. As soon as the Beach Boys came around the corner, they all took their cue.
Hey guys, we love the road,
Amy sang out. Zahir was next, with a simple little song that they had only put together that morning.
It runs through fields that are hoed.
Georgia kept beat with her shakers while Santa clapped her hands and added a harmonic background melody.
And meanders through cows that graze,
Amy added, joining in clapping.
You've worked hard for many days,
Zahir added, smiling at Amy's enthusiasm.
Your road goes for a long, long ways. Our world is better thanks to you,
Amy concluded, pointing to all the boys.
We love you for all that you do.
The last line surprised Zahir, and he looked over wide-eyed. His mouth dropped open when Amy moved forward and gave Damien a hug. Damien was even more surprised. The Beach Boys warmly thanked the musicians for the song, and all of them insisted on hugs. Amy happily complied, but the other musicians did not. When the Beach Boys were well out of sight, Zahir mumbled, I didn't know you were going to do that. Do what? Amy asked, tying her long hair into a bun. Give them hugs. Since when do the Beach Boys deserve hugs? I thought you agreed that we should sing them a song of thanks, Amy replied. They worked really hard. Everyone works hard in paradise, Zahir put in defensively, as color rose in his dark olive skin. Does everyone need a hug for what they do? Wouldn't it be nice, Amy smiled, humming the song. If there was anything that she felt was lacking in paradise, it was hugs. Without fathers and mothers and only one uncle for 20 children, physical affection hadn't been lavishly doled out. Some yearned for it more than others. Santa and Georgia exchanged amused glances. Maybe Zahir wants a hug for helping you write the song, Santa suggested merrily, clapping her hands and doing her wiggle dance. Of course, Amy laughed, reaching over to give her friend a hug. Zahir turned bright red, but he stopped complaining. Time for school, Uncle Louie was calling. The kids ran across the orchard toward the schoolhouse. Uncle Louie was standing on the grass holding a large book open with some unusual-looking materials behind him. When everyone had gathered and found a place to sit on the stairs, Uncle Louie made an announcement. We have a very special contest for everyone, he told them excitedly. This contest will be the focus of our schooling for the next few weeks. We are going to design boats to sail on the lake. There were loud cheers from almost everyone. The Beach Boys weren't as enthusiastic, however. Having just finished 2 weeks of working on the road, with lake privileges finally reinstated, they had been looking forward to many peaceful days of surfing. I would like to see who can make the strongest boat, one that can hold the most people, Uncle Louie told them. I am also interested in the most attractive boat and the fastest boat. Those are your categories: strength, appearance, and speed. Can we work in groups? Charlie asked hopefully. He still had a cast on his right arm and was carrying Maxie in his left. Yes, up to 4 in a group, Uncle Louie replied. He showed them the instructions in the book and then turned to the materials sitting behind him. He picked up the shiny silver sheets that sat in a pile. This is tin foil, he said. It is easily pliable, strong, lightweight, and fairly waterproof. Uncle Louie went on to tell them about the red wax, the corks, the rubber balloons of all sizes. Picking up each one, he explained the strength and weaknesses of the various materials and the way to use them. Amy could hardly wait to get started. She looked over at Damien, hoping to catch his eye and motion that he should be in her group. However, he and the Beach Boys were already making plans. Someone tugged playfully at her hair. She turned around. I'll work with you, Zahir suggested. Oh, okay, she said. Should we invite Rosa as well? Amy didn't think twice. No, not Rosa. Maybe Santa or Georgia. She looked over, but Georgia, Vanitha, Yuyan, and Tina were already forming a group. Nancy and Milan were beckoning to Santa. Zahir was looking around too. Odin was standing all by himself, and he didn't look very happy. His long, messy hair stuck out all around him. He was the only boy who still had long hair. Maybe we should ask Odin to be in our group. Odin? Amy whispered in disbelief. Why would you even think of asking him? Because he's sitting all alone? Wouldn't you feel badly if no one wanted you in their group? Amy looked over at Odin with only a small spark of compassion. After all, he had rescued the girls and bravely fought the scary creature, but she couldn't imagine trying to work with him in a group. However, at that very moment, Rosa, Lily, and Ponzi approached Odin to ask him to join with them. He was still a mighty hero in their eyes. What about just you and me? Amy suggested, seeing that everyone else had now formed groups. Oh, okay, he said. Well, what do you want to make? The fastest, the strongest, or the most attractive? With a sparkle in her eye, Amy replied, How about we try for all 3? Considering the options, Zahir hesitated. But if we go for the fastest, we'll need something lightweight. Then it may not be the strongest. If we go for the strongest, then it might not be attractive. Let's get the instructions for all of them, Amy whispered secretively in his ear. We'll read everything and see if we can do something better than all the rest. Laughing, Zahir nodded. We can certainly try. The instructions were piled on the deck. Taking the sheets of paper for all 3 categories, Amy and Zahir ran out to the nearby orchard to peruse the information privately. Most of the other children were helping themselves to the materials first and already beginning to experiment. Out in the orchard, Amy and Zahir leaned against Charlie's shed. Fredo saw them and came bounding over. He wanted to lie with his head on Zahir's lap. Zahir tried to hold the instruction papers up so they could read them, but the papers were as tall as he was. Little did they know the professor cut every sheet of his own printer paper into eighths for the tinies. "Let's lay these on the ground," Amy suggested. They had to get onto their hands and knees to read. Fredo groaned when he had to give up the warm lap he was resting on. Amy patted Fredo's head while Zahir began reading aloud. Little lorikeets fluttered noisily from tree to tree, and Amy wished they would come down and sit on her shoulder. Ripple sauntered over and tried to curl up on the top of the pages. Zahir picked up the purring cat and placed her on top of his sleepy dog, but Ripple wasn't happy with that arrangement. With a nasty hiss at Fredo, the cat ran off. As Zahir was explaining the benefits of using tinfoil, Amy suddenly noticed that one of the sunflowers was far taller than the others. She thought she could even see it moving upwards. Plants rarely moved in paradise because there was never a wind, only a very gentle breeze from the air filtration system. "Look at that sunflower," she notified Zahir. "You can almost see it grow. It's huge." Zahir stopped reading and looked in the direction she indicated. "It is growing," he pondered. "Let's go check it out." Leaving the papers on the ground, the two made their way to the flower garden. 10 sunflower plants stood in a neat row. The first 9 plants reached only to their waists, but the one furthest away was 3 times their height. Yet all of the plants, even the huge plant, only had their first 4 leaves. They ran over to the gigantic sunflower. Maxie saw them approaching Charlie's garden and came running over, barking. Amy patted Maxie's brown and white fur and told her that everything was okay. "These leaves actually look big enough to sit on," Zahir laughed. Reaching up, he tried to climb onto the lowest leaf. The first time he slipped off, but the next time he managed to wriggle on. With a happy smile, he laid back with his arms behind his head. "Ah, this is nice," he told Amy. "I'm going to try," Amy said, choosing a leaf on the other side of the stem. Her first few attempts were unsuccessful. Finally, she spotted the cow grazing in the field. "I'm going to get Brownie," she said. "Then I can climb on her." Brownie was very compliant as long as she had grass in her mouth to chew. With Amy's arm draped over her back, Brownie tripped happily along. Amy positioned her underneath the sunflower's leaves and hoisted herself up onto the cow. However, just at that very moment, a rabbit hopped into the garden, and the 2 dogs assumed guard duty. The commotion startled the cow, who lurched forward, throwing Amy off her back. Zahir slid off his leaf and jumped to the ground. He extended a hand to Amy. "Are you okay?" he asked. With a groan, Amy took his hand and stood up. "I'm okay," she sighed. "I guess that was a dumb idea." "I'll help you get on," Zahir offered. When Amy agreed, he gave her a boost up. The leaf was big enough for her to stretch out completely, and it almost seemed to be getting bigger by the moment. "Thank you," Amy said with delight as she lay back and breathed a happy sigh. "Oh, I love this," she sighed. Aware that it was still school time and they were supposed to be focused on their project, Amy said, "So we really should discuss which materials we want to use. I really like the wax because it's such a pretty red. I think it will be just as strong as a foil, if not stronger, and I love the color." "Let me get the instruction sheets," Zahir said, running back over to the shed to collect them. When he returned with the large sheets in his arm, he passed them up to Amy. Then he reached up to grab hold of the branch extending out to his leaf. "It's prickly," he remarked. It was quite a struggle, but eventually Zahir pulled himself back up and brushed off the prickles from his arms and hands. "This plant is growing taller," he said, looking down at the ground. "Wonder how tall it will grow. This could be fun." Enjoying their soft, reclining leaves, neither one of them considered that their situation could be in any way precarious. The 2 dogs settled down below for a snooze in the shade. "I have an idea," Zahir smiled. "Why don't we try a small piece of each type of material? We can dig some rocks out of Mining Hill and weigh each material down in the water with the same size rock. Then we'll know for sure which one floats better." "So we'll try the cork as well?" "Sure. It's rather ugly." "We can mold the wax around it to add some color and shape." "True. What was the other material that Uncle Louis mentioned?" Amy considered. "Maybe we should read these sheets and then we'll have all the details." "Great plan," Zahir agreed. He placed his arms behind his head and got ready to listen. For the next hour, Amy read the sheets and they discussed the information. Finally, they felt educated enough to begin experimentation. "Let's go dig up some rocks," Amy cheered. However, when she tried to get down, she realized she was now almost twice her height from the ground. Nervously, she said, "We're up really high." "Oh no," Zahir said, sitting upright. "This plant is growing fast, really fast. We better tell Uncle Louis about this." With that, Zahir shuffled himself to the edge of the leaf, took hold of the branch, and slid down the stem. However, the prickles on the stem were even harder and longer now. There were many ouches on the way down. Amy didn't feel that she wanted to follow his lead. "I'm scared," she said. "I'll get the ladder," Zahir told her, running off to the store with Maxie and Frodo at his heels. When he returned, he set the ladder against the plant's prickly stem, but it wasn't tall enough. "I better call Uncle Louis," Zahir said, pulling a piece of prickle out from his shirt. "There's something very strange about this plant. It's already way taller than the trees." "Please hurry," Amy pleaded, no longer enjoying the comfortable recline in the ever-expanding leaf. Zahir dashed over to Uncle Louis, who was explaining things to Rosa and Lily. "There is a huge plant growing really fast in the garden," Zahir shouted. Everyone turned to look. Charlie and Santa jumped to their feet. "We'll deal with it when school is over," Uncle Louis replied, unfazed. "But Amy is sitting on it, and she's way up in the air." "Seriously?" Uncle Louis ran over to where he could see the garden, followed by all the other tinies. Sure enough, one sunflower was 6 times the size of all the others. On a large leaf, Amy sat perched near the edge, looking down nervously. Maxie and Frodo were chasing each other around the garden. "We need to get Amy down," Uncle Louis called out. "Someone find something tall to stand on." Damien picked up the strong balloon that he and his buddies had been experimenting with. "Hey guys, come on," he muttered. While the others scurried around trying to find anything that might be tall enough to reach Amy, Damien and his friends rushed to the plant. Uncle Louis was right behind them. "Stretch it out," Damien told his friends. They all took an edge of the balloon and backed away from each other. "You've got to jump," he told Amy. "We'll catch you." "It's so far down," she cried. "It's only going to get further down," he told her. "Jump, Amy." Closing her eyes and screwing up her face tightly, Amy jumped. Uncle Louis watched anxiously as she fell. Thankfully, she landed right in the middle of the balloon, stretching it almost all the way to the ground, and then she bounced on the surface. The boys hung on to the edges and kept her safe. She was very relieved. Amy's knees were shaking, so Damien picked her up in his lanky arms and carried her back to the schoolhouse. All the tinies followed, pestering Amy with questions. No one noticed that Uncle Louis had suddenly disappeared. Nor did it seem strange to anyone that after Uncle Louis returned and was helping them again with their boats, the train came in for a second time that day. School was immediately dismissed. The giant sunflower was now 10 times the size of the others, which still only reached up to the tinies' waists. Taking all the tinies with him, Uncle Louis opened the first train door. There were only 2 things inside, some rope and a big saw. Taking the long, dangerous-looking instrument out, Uncle Louis told them all it was a bow saw. Some of the boys wanted to touch the groove's serrated edges and marveled at how sharp it felt. They had used little kitchen knives occasionally and small skill saws on the building boards, but they had never seen a saw so long and with so many sharp spikes. "Ouch!" Odin yelled as his hasty investigation of the blade drew blood on his finger. "Do you need a bandage?" Tina inquired anxiously. The cut was only skin deep. Odin shook his head and put his finger in his mouth. All the other boys pulled their hands back. "Yes, it's very sharp," Uncle Louis affirmed. "This saw is the one we need to cut down the giant sunflower, but we have to be careful. It can do damage to us if we don't use it properly." "So it's a dangerous tool?" Franz asked with a sly look. Uncle Louis saw Franz and Odin exchange crafty glances. "Yes," he agreed warily. "Anything that can be used for good purposes can also be used for bad. Always choose to use things for good if you want Paradise to stay safe and beautiful." Franz and Odin lagged behind while the other children followed Uncle Louis out to the garden with much excitement and apprehension. Looking around for the best place to bring the giant down, Uncle Louis explained, "We need to make sure that when we cut this sunflower down, it doesn't fall on anyone or wreck any plants in the garden." Everyone's eyes grew wide. While some were fearful, others loved the drama. The sunflower was the tallest plant they had ever seen. It was now 4 times the size of Uncle Louis. Eyeing the distance to the school roof carefully, Uncle Louis asked Damien to rope the plant, tying it tightly, and then the Beach Boys were told to carry the other end toward the meadow. Kenzie and Vahid were given the task of sawing through the stem, while everyone else was told to stand near the schoolhouse. Several girls huddled under the school roof, hoping the plant wouldn't land on them. Most of the boys stood as far from the school and as close to the plant as they deemed to be courageously safe. Kenzie and Vahid began pulling the saw back and forth across the overgrown plant. "Keep a tight hold on that rope," Uncle Louis demanded sharply, looking toward the Beach Boys. Sawing with all their might, Kenzie and Vahid took frequent breaks to mop their sweaty foreheads. Suddenly there was a loud crack, and the whole plant began toppling toward the school. "Pull hard!" Uncle Louis yelled. The Beach Boys yanked on the rope just in time. The tall plant changed direction and came down with a loud thud. Its 2 top leaves nearly reached the dry riverbed. All of Paradise erupted into loud cheers. The garden was saved. Uncle Louis directed all the boys to take a turn cutting up the plant. It took quite some time for all the pieces to be carried across the meadow and jammed into the train. When they were finished, Uncle Louis went back for the bow saw, but it wasn't where he had last seen it. "Hey guys, has anyone seen the saw?" But no one seemed to know. "I need the saw back now," he said firmly. "No dinner for anyone until it's back in my possession." Damien, Franz, and Odin exchanged glances. We'll bring it right back if we see it anywhere," Damien promised. Uncle Louis nodded knowingly. While there were other small, useful saws and knives in Paradise for regular needs, none were so sharp and potentially destructive as the bow saw. He knew the professor didn't want to see any living trees chopped down. In 5 minutes, the boys were back with the instrument, claiming they had found it in the forest. "Thank you for finding it and bringing it back," Uncle Louis said, wishing he could fully believe their story. He put the saw into the first car in the train and waited until the train had backed out of Paradise. He hoped they wouldn't need such a hazardous tool again. Chapter 20. Stealing Again. Evan was in the supply room when the train came through the secure entrance and backed into the loading dock. He could see it was full of sunflower pieces. The professor was walking down the long corridor. He had been checking on the new baby animals in the laboratory incubators. With a pleased smile, he was happy that his miniaturization process was improving with each new attempt. From the valuable banks of frozen embryos that were available for university research, this time he'd lost only 1%. "The deer and calves are growing well," the professor told Evan as he entered the supply room corridor. "If we get the other animals started next week, they will all be ready to come out at the same time." "I have 3 viable puppy embryos which can go into incubation today," Evan relayed. "I still need to finish testing the kitten embryos. Think we might have 5 or 6. "Excellent," the professor nodded. He looked into the windows of the electric train and pressed a button to open the doors. Watching the professor take out a few of the crisply hewn pieces of plant, Evan imagined a worst-case scenario. "What if this sunflower had reached the top of the dome?" he remarked. "What would we have done?" "I guess we'd have to send everyone back into the nursery so we could reopen the dome and take it out," Jack surmised. "That would be a major ordeal. Especially if Amy was still sitting on it." "True," the professor contemplated with a shudder, picking up the growing tip for investigation. "We'd have had to send in an oxygen tank to keep her alive," he pondered. "She would have had the opportunity to see what goes on beyond her glass world, and then she'd tell all the others and our secret would be over. I'm glad we were both alerted quickly this time." Evan was collecting the pieces of sunflower and laying them out end to end on the counter to measure. Watching his assistant put the pieces in a line, the professor remarked, "I'd like to know what caused such rapid growth." "True. It didn't even grow normally," Evan pondered. "A normal sunflower would not grow that fast." Bringing over a long ruler, the professor added his growth tip piece to the line and measured the overall length. He considered. It did indeed demonstrate a very fast growth rate. Whatever mutation occurred affected the entire organism. It must have been initiated at the germline. "We'll have to look into it," Evan nodded thoughtfully. Should we see how the boat competition is coming along first? Jack suggested. The two scientists put the sunflower pieces down in the lab, placing them in a moist container. Then they headed back up to the Paradise room. As they stood watching the various groups experiment and build, they noticed Damien, Franz, and Lima sneaking off behind the schoolhouse. Louis was helping Lily, Rosa, Odin, and Ponzi. Between Rosa's wails that nothing was working out and Odin's outbursts of frustration, Louis was quite distracted. "Hey, what are they up to?" Evan questioned. Walking around the outside of the dome, Professor Lemans followed the boys. They were sneaking through the thick forest of Rainbow Hill. "How many pipe cleaners do you figure we'll need?" Lima asked. "At least 5, Franz answered. "We really should trade something, guys," Damien protested. "Us? Trade?" Lima replied disdainfully. "Do you want to be assigned to build another road?" Damien asked wearily. "They won't catch us this time. No one is at the store," Franz argued. "What if they see us using them? Then they'll ask how we got them." "We'll work on it at night and cover them with the foil. No one will know." The professor looked over at Evan with disappointment. "When will these guys learn?" he whispered, shaking his head. "Maybe Damien is learning," Evan replied. "If he was smart, he'd turn and walk the other way." Evan didn't respond. He and the professor watched with heavy hearts as the boys came to the store and tried to break in. Evan hoped Damien would have the courage to stop the others and find a right way to get what they needed. "I'm not doing this," Damien said flatly. "Then stand outside and at least let us know if anyone is coming," Lima ordered. Damien agreed, much to the dismay of the professor and Evan, who were hoping he would refuse altogether. Franz tried the front door and laughed. "It's not even locked. This is easy." In a moment, he and Lima were out with the 5 pipe cleaners and 3 bananas. "You took bananas as well?" Damien frowned. "Of course, I'm hungry," Franz smiled, handing one to Damien. With a shrug, Damien took the fruit and pulled down the peel. "How sad," the professor remarked, shaking his head. "Well, at least he's beginning to think it through," Evan advocated. "I believe we should support Louis' desire for consequences," Professor Lemans decided. "Maybe persuasion isn't always enough. Some people respond to reasoning better than others. I'll suggest to him that from now on, if anyone steals, they should pay back double for what they took." "That's a good rule," Evan agreed. "It's not a rule," Professor Lemans told him firmly. "This is a consequence. It's just good common sense." Evan didn't argue. The boys were enjoying their bananas as they made their way back through the forest. Franz stopped suddenly and pointed to a place where the pine trees nestled together. "Here's a great place to hide the pipe cleaners until dark." Lima laid down the fuzzy cleaners well out of sight. The professor picked up his phone and began texting a message to Louis, letting him know what the boys had done and where the pipe cleaners could be found. He also suggested the new consequence if anyone was caught stealing. Knowing that Louis was unlikely to see the message until he checked the phone late at night, the professor and Evan headed back down to the lab, hoping to investigate the genetics of the wayward sunflower.